Around 1,600 jobs at Tesco are at risk of being cut as the supermarket giant unveils plans to restructure its night operations and restructure its stores. Britain's biggest supermarket is planning to move overnight restocking to the day at 36 large stores and 49 convenience shops across the country. Tesco also said 36 of its stations will see staff reductions as they become pump services during night hours. It comes after the retailer confirmed on Monday it plans to close its Jack Discount supermarket arm, with 7 stores closing for good and the remaining 6 becoming Tesco stores. Tesco also announced on Monday that it was closing meat, fish and deli counters in 317 stores. It is understood that this move will also affect hundreds of store employees. Tesco stressed that these workers are all offered alternative jobs and did not include them in the 1,600 figure. The company cited the highly competitive and crowded grocery market and customers changing shopping habits during the COVID pandemic as reasons for the changes. Tesco said it is aiming to redeploy all affected staff and highlighted 3,000 vacancies at its operations. The restructuring moves come despite the company telling shareholders last month that it expects record profits of more than £2.6 billion for the current financial years. So, letting people go means more profit. Tesco is among grocery retailers that have thrived during the pandemic as customers spend more time at home. Because of the Ukraine crisis, US President Joe Biden has announced that he will send thousands of soldiers to Europe, including Germany. There has been harsh criticism from Russia for this move. Amid the severe tensions in the Ukraine conflict, US President Joe Biden wants to send around 2,000 soldiers to Europe, 300 of them here to Germany. 1,700 military personnel are to be relocated to Poland, and that was announced by the US Department of Defense in Washington on Wednesday. In turn, 1,000 American soldiers would be sent to Romania from Germany. Washington assured that it was not a permanent decision. Nevertheless, Russia sees this as a provocation. The current situation requires us to increase deterrence and defense on NATO's eastern flank, Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said. The troop transfer is an unmistakable signal that the United States stand by its allies. If necessary, there could be further troop movements. The announcement came a day after Kremlin chief Vladimir Putin had warned of the consequences of further eastward expansion of NATO, in particular the possible admission of Ukraine into the alliance. There were prompt angry reactions from Moscow. Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko spoke of a destructive step. Tensions would increase, the scope for political decisions would be narrowed. Vladimir Yabarov of the Federation Council, the upper house of parliament, spoke of a provocation. In contrast, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg welcomed the planned transfer. This strengthens the deterrence and defense of the alliance. This is a strong signal of US commitment, he said in Brussels. Other states also provided additional air, land and sea forces. Pentagon spokesman Kirby emphasized that the troops who have now been deployed are separate from the soldiers who have already been put on increased alert. On Biden's orders, 8,500 soldiers in the US were put on increased standby last week to enable rapid deployment to Europe if necessary. The president and other members of the government have repeatedly made it clear that no US soldiers would be sent to Ukraine. Tens of thousands of US soldiers are also stationed in Europe outside of times of crisis, including around 35,000 here in Germany, where I live. With Western reports of more than 100,000 Russian troops deploying near Ukraine, there are fears that the Kremlin is planning an invasion of its neighboring country. Moscow denies that. It's also considered possible that the Russian side wants to stir up fears in order to persuade NATO to make concessions on demands for new security guarantees. All US presidential documents are archived after their terms of office. Donald Trump is said to have handed over partially torn papers. This doesn't make the investigation into the storming of the Capitol any easier, by the way. The parliamentary inquiry into the January 2021 storming of the US Capitol appears to have obtained White House documents that had been torn up by former President Donald Trump. Some of the documents were torn into pieces and then taped back together, reports the Washington Post. It was initially unclear what exactly the documents were. The National Archives responsible for storing such documents, which had forwarded the documents to the investigative committee, basically confirmed that they received documents torn up by the previous president after Trump's term in office. The National Archives on Tuesday referred to AFP news agency media reports since 2018 that Trump had a habit of tearing up documents, and that White House officials then taped the documents back together for legal retention. These were turned over to the National Archives after the end of the Trump administration, along with a number of torn documents that had not been reconstructed by the White House, the Washington-based institution said. A law states that a president's written records must be turned over to the National Archives after the end of his term of office. The National Archives recently turned over documents from Trump's tenure to the investigative committee into the January 6, 2021 Capitol storming. Trump unsuccessfully appealed against the release of the documents and ultimately failed before the country's Supreme Court. The members of the investigative committee hope that the memos, emails, caller and visitor lists, as well as conversation notes, will provide new insights into the role played by Trump and those around him in the violent attack on the US Parliament. Two missing television journalists I talked about before in my videos have been found in Afghanistan. Waris Hasrat and Aslam Hijab were released and taken to their families. The news manager of the private TV channel Ariana, Ali Javad Ashgari, confirmed on Wednesday to the German press agency. There was no explanation from the radical Islamist Taliban as to why they were being held. They are fine and have not been physically abused. One of the two had a toothache while he was being held, and a doctor gave him medication for it. There are obviously no further details at the moment. According to colleagues, the reporters were taken away on Monday by armed men in uniform in government cars right in front of the broadcaster's gate. A spokesman for the Taliban Secret Service, the GDI, denied on Tuesday that the journalists had been arrested by the GDI. Taliban spokesman Sabiullah Mujahid did not comment on the case at an event in the capital Kabul on Wednesday. He said they are trying to revive the Media Complaints Commission to avoid misunderstandings and resolve issues through that commission. One such commission was disbanded in 2015 after it was often used by the government to complain about critical reporting and intimidate the media. The media law of the previous government is still in force, Mujahid said. The media will be supported if they observe the Islamic framework and national interests. Journalists have been intimidated or detained since the Taliban took power in Afghanistan in August. Some reported being beaten or tortured after their release. Dozens of media workers have left the country. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.